Our text this week is from the book of Hosea, chapter 11. This fall, we have spent time in the historical writings of the Old Testament, and now we move forward to the writings of the prophets. I have to admit, I kind of geek out about the writings of the prophets. I really love the prophets. Last week, we met the prophet Elijah. Now, Elijah was written about in 1 Kings, but today we look at the writings of the prophet Hosea, his own writing. There's a lot to unpack in the book of Hosea. Today we're just looking at 9 verses. The words are rich, they are complex, and to me, I found them to be so deeply meaningful. Until this point, God has been a character in the stories that we have looked at. Other people writing about what God is doing and how God is acting. But now we have a prophet speaking the words of God. We read how God is thinking and how God is feeling. It is rich theologically because these words reveal to us just a little bit more of who God is. And I think they dispel a widely held misunderstanding about God. Listen to these words. Listen closely for the metaphor of a parent and a child relationship as we travel from love to frustration to overwhelming compassion. Hear now the words of God as they were revealed to the prophet Hosea. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more I called them, the further they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals, and they burned incense to idols. But it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. It was I who took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with bands of human kindness. I led them with cords of love. I treated them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and I fed them. They will return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria will be their king because they have refused to return to me. The sword will strike wildly in their cities. It will consume the bars of their gates and will take everything because of their schemes. My people are bent on turning away from me, and though they cry out to the Most High, he will not raise them up. How? How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over to Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboim? My heart winces within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I won't act on the heat of my anger. I won't return to destroy Israel. For I am God and not a human being. I am the Holy One in your midst. I will not come in harsh judgment. Will you pray with me? Mothering God, you have many names. You chose us, O God. You drew us in. You lifted us, and you hold us close. You support us as we learn. You provide for all our needs. You love us through our difficult days. Remember your compassion and love toward us today, God, and teach us to remember too. Amen. Well, there's a persistent myth in religious circles that you have likely heard. The God of the Old Testament is a God of wrath, a God of vengeance. The God of the New Testament is all about grace and mercy. Let's be honest, our culture today seems to like this angry God. But I wonder if you've noticed the people who talk about God being angry always portray God as angry at someone else, never at them, never angry at their perspective. Today we put that aside. Did you hear that in the metaphor that Hosea gave us? It is the rich, complex, sometimes beautiful, and sometimes painful world of parenting. Many of us, myself included, think of God as stable, unmovable, unshakable. But here, did you hear it? Hosea paints a picture of a God working through the full range of the biggest feelings. We heard love, but there was jealousy, nostalgia, compassion, and suffering. And although God plainly states at the end of our reading, "I am not a human," it is wrapped in the beautiful and honest depiction of the human experience of parenting. And I think we all know that the relationship between parent and child is often complicated, and it is always life-defining. Now, you may have heard the big news this week. Barbara Streisand released her autobiography. At over 900 pages, it's nearly as long as the Old Testament itself. I listened to an interview with her. It was about 2 hours long. She is 81 years old. Over and over, the conversation returned to the complicated relationship she had with her mother and life growing up without a father. I was so struck by this because, you see, no matter our age, no matter our status or our station in life, being someone's child and being someone's parent is such a formative part of our human experience. And so to read what Hosea does with this paradigm, I think gives us a whole new way of experiencing our relationship with God. Now, last week, we were in the northern kingdom. Ahab, not such a great king, was king, and Elijah, the prophet, got himself into what we called good trouble. He called out the practice of worshiping these false deities like Baal and Asherah. We're ahead now about 200 years. We're still in the northern kingdom of Israel, sometimes referred to as Ephraim, after one of the tribes, as you heard in the text. And despite 200 years passing, Hosea's situation is not that different than where Elijah found himself. The people are still worshiping the Canaanite gods, and the God of Israel is upset. Remember being a kid? You had that friend who could stay out a little later than you, and in a fit of anger, you said to your parents, "I wish they were my parents." That's a little bit of what's happening here in this text, isn't it? It's kind of like that. We have this prophetic oracle, a writing of a prophet, sharing God's very own words. God is speaking to them, and God is speaking to us. And in this metaphor, God is parenting a rebellious teenager, and in this case, it is God's people, Israel. And we go on this journey with God through these emotions, this beautiful imagery where God recalls what the child was like as a baby, dealing with the challenge of loving this rebellious teenager through the lens of remembering what it was like to care for an infant, what it was like when they depended on God for absolutely everything, helpless, innocent. Maybe you've seen the movie Beautiful Boy. Plays out on the screen. It's based on a true story. Steve Carell plays a man named David Sheff, a father dealing with the brutality of his son's drug addiction. The movie is interspersed with flashbacks of the father caring for the boy as an infant and as a toddler. He's remembering who he was, what it was like to care for him. There's one scene that I think is so powerful. His son, in the throes of an addiction that is about to end his life, says to his father, "This is who I am," and his father says, "No. No, it is not. I knew you. I knew who you were. I knew you as a little boy." He holds on to that, to love his son through this most difficult period. His love can't change the consequences, but it is that love that carries him through, and his son's life is changed. It is like this text, how God speaks of God's people. I nurtured you. I fed you. I held you to my cheek. Some translations begin this text by saying that God fell in love with Israel. It's a story of adoption. But like a rebellious teen, God says, the more I called them, the further they went from me. Maybe this is a view of your own relationship with God. I can see myself in this too. Sometimes the more God calls, we put our phones on silent. As individuals, as a community, as a nation. This parenting metaphor of the complex relationship is so fitting. In preparing for today, I read a statistic: 27% of people are estranged from a close family member. Complex, beautiful, painful world of parenting. God crying out, I kept calling, but you kept drifting away. In this case, they were worshiping and sacrificing to Baal, putting their trust in places that kept them from God. God says, I rescued you from Egypt. I taught you to walk. I took you in my arms. You relied on me for everything. This is not a vengeful, wrath-filled God. This is a gentle, compassionate God, estranged but longing for that connection. I led them with bands of human kindness. I led them with cords of love, like Jesus saying, my yoke is easy. And you picture cords of love, I think of a toddler on one of those leashes walking through the mall. They're meant for safety and security to keep from harm, but now the people see this as stifling, restrictive, and they rebel, they pull away, they give credit to other gods, they turn to other sources of security. And you heard God was angry, frustrated, even jealous, but in that recollection of that love, God is overcome with compassion. God says, how? How can I give you up? How can I let you be like the destroyed cities of Admah and Zeboim? You and you are my dear child. Israel deserved judgment, but it was met with mercy, obtained through a suffering God, a God longing to care for us, longing to be a mother and a father. Like a parent, God's heart breaks when we are heartbroken. God longs for us. God's capacity for compassion is unfailing and unending. Like the father in the movie, it doesn't mean that we are protected from every consequence, but it means we never, ever suffer alone. Because God loves us with this kind of compassion, we too are called to love. Like loving a child, it's the kind of love that demands our all. Love is risky. C.S. Lewis put it this way: to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal, because to love is to be vulnerable. To allow ourselves to experience that love, to open ourselves to God's love, to the love of others in this community, it's a risk, but it is a risk worth taking. That is the heart of God that I believe we are called to proclaim, to rise above the anger, to love louder than the voices of hate and division. This world needs to know that there is a God of love, of compassion, of grace and mercy, and even at our worst, like a parent, God is there waiting for the prodigal child to come home. We all know the 23rd Psalm. It says, "Goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." That is more accurately translated as goodness and mercy will relentlessly pursue me all the days of my life. That's how it is with God's love once you've experienced it. You spread his love to everyone you want to pass it on.